Are there any statements? I call the member for Moreton.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I also take this opportunity to speak of the hardship that many Australians have endured over this summer due to natural disasters, particularly Queenslanders. Sadly, despite commentary from some political leaders, climate change isn't complete fallacy. The reality is climate change is occurring. Science isn't a weather vane on this topic. The science seems to be clearly heading in one direction, and that is the reality that we'll be having more horrible, horrific weather events in the future. And it pains me to say that Australia has not, again this summer, escaped the devastating effects of natural disasters. Sadly, fires still burn across the south-east of the country, and floodwaters are still receding to the north. And the people in Bundaberg North, I know, are doing it particularly tough right at this moment. In my home state of Queensland, ex-tropical cyclone Oswald caused destruction right along the Queensland coastline with damaging winds, heavy rain, flooding, tidal surges and tornadoes, and then moved down into New South Wales. I saw when I drove around my electorate on Sunday the 27th of January the preparations that people were making in my electorate in the suburbs of Yeronga, Graceville, Sherwood and Chelmer. I particularly spent time talking to Councillor Nicole Johnson, the independent councillor for that area, and also my suburbs of Oxley and Corinda, and particularly in Rockley, an area of my electorate that floods seems to be every 6 months or so. And I'd like to commend Cameron Crowther and the Annerley ALP branch that took the time to go out and help people unpack, move their furniture. An example of the Labor Party getting out into the community and doing what's right at the ground. And also I'd like to thank Jenny Golden, one of my friends in the Sherwood area, who particularly pointed out some of the streets in her area that needed help. My constituents, thankfully, mostly escaped major damage. Sadly, those in Bundaberg and Gayndah and Mundubbera and Gladstone and Gympie and the Fraser Coast and many other areas enjoyed extreme levels of flooding that some people are saying was a once-in-a-200-year flood that will affect these communities for many years to come. Sadly, the water was about the same level as the floods of 2 years ago. So when you talk about a once-in-200-year flood, things are changing. As the floodwaters recede, the massive extent of the damage is becoming clear, with thousands of homes, businesses, roads, bridges and services inundated. 6 people have died in this tragic flood crisis, and my condolences go out to their friends and families. I'd especially like to mention Yukun Pan, a 25-year-old from Taiwan, who was here on a working visa. He's from the Taoyuan County, south of Taipei, and I especially pass on my condolences to his family. To lose a son so far from home must be truly heartbreaking. The authorities are estimating more than 7,500 people are affected and 3,000 homes flooded, not to mention the power outages that affected so many people. I know it's not the same as losing a life. I had no power for 3 days, so got to eat a lot of steak and a lot of ice cream to clean out my freezer. I know some people are still having power problems. So these troubles are nothing compared to the many Queensland residents who are dealing with catastrophic flooding for the second time in 2 years. The impact from these floods comes as many people are still recovering and rebuilding their lives after those floods that seemed so long ago. In fact, I had organised to send out a letter commemorating the 2-year anniversary of the floods, and as you know, to send out a letter to 40,000 homes takes a bit of preparation. I wrote the letter, got the letter ready to go out. In between time, the floods for 2013 came out, so some people received letters in mailboxes about the anniversary event 2 years ago while their mailboxes were underwater. It was a bit unfortunate in timing. And sadly, so many people in my electorate have had the insurance premium hikes that go with a flood event, and they've had to deal with those for the last 2 years. Like most of the people in Moreton, I well remember recall seeing water on my streets, water everywhere, and then after the water went away, the stink of the mud. Even just at the end of my street, I remember the stench and how it affected the skate park, and then going to other houses to see water above I have houses in my electorate that were totally underwater in 2011. Especially in Rockley. So as we see time and time again, the volunteers stepped up. They came from everywhere to help their fellow Australians, their fellow Queenslanders in a time of tragedy. It's a Queensland thing to do, and also the very human thing to do wherever you come from around the world. because I've got a particularly multicultural electorate. It was heartwarming to see my varied and various communities working together to rebuild, neighbour helping neighbour, business helping business, stranger helping stranger, and I express thanks to those who have donated to the flood appeal, helping those in a time of great need. More needs to be done. I commend the volunteers that came together across the south-east of Australia during the catastrophic fires that have caused much pain and heartache for many Australian families, and that previous speakers have mentioned. I'd like to thank the hundreds of ADF personnel, especially the reservists, I say, involved in the emergency response to Queensland floods and storms. I'd also like to thank the SES, the Royal Fire Service, the Australian Red Cross and all the many other community organisations involved in helping out over the summer throughout these devastating times, particularly the service organisations in Moreton. It was their finest hours, Maruka Lines where I live, the McGregor Lines, Archfield and Salisbury Rotary, to name but a few, the Crescents of Brisbane, an Islamic group, and the Taiwanese community, many organisations. Thankfully, as I go around the Moreton electorate, I see evidence that our community has worked hard to rebuild and has mostly returned to normal and maybe perhaps dodged a bullet. I'm sympathetic to the words of Premier Campbell-Newman, please don't quote me on that, but his comments about rebuilding properly in a way that we won't be swept away in a year or two's time. I'd like to finish by quoting one of my constituents, Martin Fimbo from Graceville, who's talking about the priority infrastructure plan and what we need to do, and I'd ask that Campbell-Newman and the Lord Mayor of Brisbane to bring in backflow devices in my suburbs, not just New Farm and Milton, some of the LNP electorates, but in my suburbs. Hopefully he's not punishing the independent councillor Nicole Johnson because she used to be LNP but has switched and become independent. My suburbs need to be considered in round 4 of the Natural Disaster Resilience Program. That $10 million, some of it needs to come to my electorate. We raised $1.7 billion from the flood levy. The reality is that costs the community about $5.7 billion to rebuild. I note the Libs voted against that flood levy. The reality is there's going to be a lot of expenses. Lord Mayor Campbell-Newman, when he was the Lord Mayor, said that the state should pay when it was a Labor government. Now that he's the Premier, he said that the federal government should pay. It's a weird journey to Damascus that he took. Australians are pretty tough, but these natural disasters really put us to the test. The nation's response shows a true sense of community spirit as we come together to clean up and rebuild, and I thank my constituents particularly for their great efforts.